But so to begin with, I'm going to begin with the one that,
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
I'm in the upstairs part of my house with the door closed and the windows closed. So they must have been pretty loud. But there's an air conditioner here, so I guess that the vents of the air conditioner aren't exactly soundproof.
I think that'll be a great opener for us.
Yeah, me too. My favorite is when unwanted sound effects come in. I hope your cat meows directly into your microphone at some point.
Tell me a story.
Okay, so if you were to pick one story that you wanted to hear about, I'm certainly hoping that story would be about Darius the Great.
Oh, you bet.
What
nice. Better story is there?
Off the top of my head, I really can't think of any. I've got a lot of reasons why Darius the Great is the best. So, a little bit of background information. Darius the Great lived from 550 to 486 BC, and he was the son of apologies in advance for pronunciations, but he was the son of Hystaspes, who was a satrap of Parthia. And if you listen to our last podcast, you know that satraps were very highly ranking political officials in the Persian Empire. And satraps are what
they were governors.
Yeah. So satraps were governors, and you can attribute a lot of Persia's success to the fact that there was a central emperor who could depend on his satraps to rule individually based on the needs of their different communities. So there was one in Parthia, there was one in Susa, and there was one in each of the other major communities as well. I just realized that my laptop wasn't muted. I meant to do that, so I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
But yeah, so there was a satrap in every major city that was under the Persian rule. And he was king of Persia from 522 to 486. So starting when he was 27 or 28, that's when he became the Persian king. And we'll talk about that soon. And he was the third king of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. So that means that since Cyrus is the first king, that means that Darius ruled right after Cyrus's son ruled. And the reason why he is called Darius the Great is because he was able to further extend the reach of the empire. And we all know from the last podcast that Cyrus made the biggest empire to date as of his coming. And Cyrus is right on the cusp of when history gets reliable and no other empires came close to his. So just maintaining an empire of his size would have been a gargantuan feat. But Darius was actually able to extend it, so that's a commendable achievement as well. Darius is mentioned in 4 major religious texts.
In 4?
Yeah, he's mentioned in Haggai, which is a book in the Hebrew Bible of the Tanakh.
Okay.
He's mentioned in Zechariah, which is in the Torah. He's mentioned in the Ezra-Nehemiah book, which is in the Hebrew Bible of Ketuvim. And I believe that Ezra-Nehemiah is a canonical text, but I'm going to actually have to double check on that.
I am almost certain of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is too, because I've talked about that before in a setting where I'm surrounded by people that know much more about canonical texts than I do. And also in Daniel, which is biblical. And then he also is the one
Daniel was at the court of Darius.
Yeah.
Oh.
And speaking of being in the court of Darius, another thing that helped him sort of inherit or I'm not sure if he inherited or if he self-proclaimed himself as Darius the Great, but when you entered his court, it was a very formal proceeding. He did not take kindly to being looked directly in the eye. Everyone knows about Darius's iconic, gigantic beard, and Darius always dressed in the finest golds, in the finest golds as in color, and the finest silks that he was able to don. So he very much embodied the image of a person who deserved the title of great. He was by no means some schmuck.
Well, you don't want a schmuck to rule your empire.
No. Darius the schmuck would probably not have done nearly as well. For many reasons. So, as I mentioned, he also initiated the construction of the new Persian capital of Persepolis, which was a series of interconnected palaces. And he encouraged political and artistic endeavors. And this is seen in the architecture of Persepolis. So hopefully we can include some pictures of that architecture in the show notes. And there was also a New Year's celebration, which is an obvious commitment to the arts, since we all know that New Year's celebrations are obviously quite costly.
Oh yeah. So was Darius? So the tradition of Nowruz then is that what you're talking about? That initiated during Darius's reign?
Yes, I did not want to butcher the pronunciation, but yes, I believe that's what I read and I said, oh look, I know how to pronounce New Year. I don't know how to pronounce that word with a Z and an N in it.
Yeah, it's Nowruz. It means new day actually. And
Okay.
yeah, I had a little celebration with a Persian friend of mine last year.
I was actually just going to ask you if your Persian friend celebrated that. So that's quite cool. Then maybe we'll speak about that in the future. That might be a fun little, very quick segment to do on a day when we're making less content.
That'd be good.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So he also made legal reforms. He had a distinct set of two juridical systems. So he had one court for settling big government disputes, which were things like treason against the state. But also he had another one for smaller disputes that like things where families stole livestock from one another and things like that. So by dividing them in two, he had improved efficiency, improved expertise in each of those areas. And his achievements there were lauded by Plato himself, as well as many Greeks and Romans for his political system.
Okay, yeah, great.
So now we're going to move on to how Darius moved into power. And after that, we're going to talk about his early years and his kingly escapades, and we're going to kind of wrap up with his. We sort of started off with his legacy, and we'll just wrap up with the end of his rule, and we'll sort of go into a little bit about Xerxes.
Okay.
And how he finished up some conflicts with him.
All right, yeah, cool. So, what was the name of Cyrus's son again?
Cyrus's son's name is Bardiya.
No, Bardiya was the
Oh wait, sorry,
controversial one who may or may not have existed.
Is it Cambyses then?
Yeah, Cambyses.
Okay.
So yeah, right, because Darius was not the son of Cambyses. He was his first cousin 3 times removed. So how did he get power?
So Cambyses was ruler, and the son of Cyrus, Cambyses, was usurped by a person named Bardiya. What he did was he impersonated the rightful heir to the throne after Cambyses. So that's what Smerdis did. And after Smerdis did that, there was a Persis nobleman named Otanes who knew that the real Smerdis had ears, but another man named Smerdis, who usurped the throne, would not have ears because they committed a past crime. So Otanes sent his daughter to see whether or not this man had ears, and he saw that this man didn't have ears, which is pretty weird that they had a guy with no ears ruling, and that nobody was like, didn't you have ears like a week ago? No? Okay. You know, like he must have been a great liar to go from having ears to not having ears and having them be completely healed. Like maybe he just wore a hat for the first month/ever of his reign. But anyway, so Otanes finds this out, and he gathers 6 of his noblemen and has a late arrival in Darius, who is also a nobleman, and they charge the throne. So here we go. We have 7 people.
Ooh.
They charge the throne room. 5 of them take on the guards. And then Darius and Otanes end up killing Smerdis and Smerdis's right-hand man. I don't actually remember who it was, but I will look that up and maybe we'll add that in. So they kill Smerdis and Smerdis's right-hand man. And 5 days later, amidst all of the people finding out this news and people trying to figure out who should rule, these 7 noblemen have a vote on what to do next. And they decide between democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. And democracy is the favorite of Otanes, who actually started this whole process. Monarchy is the favorite of Darius, and oligarchy was proposed by someone else unbeknownst to history. And there was a 4-7 vote of monarchy occurring, and Darius had to compete in order to be the one to rule the monarchy.
Got it.
And I think that this is kind of interesting that, actually I'll just go on with this. So Darius is only 28 years old, which I think is pretty young for him to be ruling a kingdom. But anyway, I could be wrong. So the way that they choose the monarchy is to have a contest to see who could get their horse to neigh first after sunrise. And Darius somehow cheated, and because he was able to get his horse to neigh, he is the one that ascended to the throne. Now my question is, why does getting your horse to neigh make you the best candidate to be a ruler? But I guess that's a question that nobody will ever know, and you know what? Maybe we should just have all of our... Darius is called Darius the Great, right?
Yeah.
So maybe the Republicans, in their next debate, should try to get horses to neigh, and then they'll become president, and then they'll be known as Donald Trump the Great, or Christopher Christie the Great, if they can get their horse to neigh, And then that can just be broadcast on all the papers, like Christie gets horse to neigh first.
I would watch that
Because in football
debate.
we have, the octopus picks 99% of the time the correct team to win the Super Bowl. Now we can do it with horses for presidency.
Wait, what's this about? Octopus in the Super Bowl?
Oh, there's an octopus that picks a certain team to win the Rose Bowl or something. I don't know. And what it does is it just grabs a ball out of the... they put this octopus in a pool, and they have a ball with, the Ravens on it, and a ball with the Steelers on it. Whenever it thinks it's gonna win, it just picks that ball. And they're like, oh, Mr. Octopus picked the Steelers. They're probably gonna win. We can do the same thing with presidents now. And then we can have great presidents. Cause octopi and horses... Is it octopi or octopodi?
No.
I'm pretty sure it's...
Depending on how anglicized you want it to be, I think, octopuses is acceptable. The Greek plural would be, octopodes, or, as at least one person I know says it, octopodes.
That sounds like a Greek philosopher.
Well, because it's Greek.
but still, like a philosopher.
I would read the works of Octopodes.
Yeah, me too. Octopodes the Great, if he knows how to make a horse neigh.
Yeah.
Anyway, so octopodi. These are the advantages of having a linguist on staff, so he can correct me for all of those things. So now, an interesting thing to note is that people disagree. So remember that the ruler that Darius usurped is either Smerdis, pseudo-Smerdis, so either eared Smerdis or non-eared Smerdis, or Guamata, who Smerdis supposedly had murdered in order to usurp the throne. And scholars disagree on whether or not he was an imposter, because if he was not an imposter, that would make it harder for Darius, who has a very distant claim to the throne, to be able to inherit the throne. So what Darius did is he basically claimed that he was destined to rule the throne due to holy reasons. He had divine rights to rule. And this is not only complicated by the fact that whether or not he usurped an imposter, it's also complicated by the fact that Darius's father and grandfather were both alive when Darius ascended to the throne. So Darius used his distant claim to get the throne from a person who he allegedly said was an imposter before more rightful heirs in his father and grandfather could. So Darius had to do a lot of things in order to get that in his favor, in order for him to be ruler. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, now that I remember looking back to the family tree of Cyrus, that didn't he have two other sons besides Cambyses and the imposter guy?
He did, and I'm not sure whether or not those two other sons were killed, but I think that's something worth looking up, and that's something we can add in.
Okay.
I guess that since this is just our second podcast, I'm going to do more homework when I do the next one. And unfortunately, it's been a little over a week since I've looked at this information. So I would have those facts more readily accessible had I looked at this just yesterday, but unfortunately I don't,
Yeah. All right.
Because I asked those same questions and I have the same answers, but now I don't,
Cool.
So in Darius's early rule, there were multiple revolts in both Babylonia and Susania. And you can attribute these revolts somewhat to just the fact that they weren't happy with their satraps, but I think that part of it was also the fact that they no longer believed that they were being ruled by a person who had a rightful claim to the throne, and that if there was a time to revolt, it was now. And fortunately for Darius, these uprisings weren't coordinated. It's not like he had to send an army to every satrap in his kingdom to quell an uprising. Luckily enough, they were scattered, and he could send a small army here and there to take them to quickly put out fires. So there were actually 19 full-scale battles from 9 different rebel leaders, which were all basically put to death by the time that Darius got to each of those areas, and he was able to finally establish authority 9 years into his reign in 519 BC. And in 518, he
took 5 whole years.
9 whole years of...
Oh, 9 whole years. Oh.
Yeah, 9 whole years of rebellion. So, in 518, he actually travels all the way to Egypt, and he puts his satrap, who was also a rebel leader at the time, Ariandes, to death. And that kind of marks the end of all of his quests to quell rebellions. And after that, Darius went on to maintain the empire, expand the empire, and start embarking on projects to improve the empire's ability to move goods and to expand its borders. So one thing that he did was he continued maintaining the 10,000 immortals that we mentioned previously, which no doubt helped him in his conquests. And he also created the Royal Road, which we mentioned previously. And whether he created it or he actually just extended it, the Royal Road was 1,500 miles long, and it was the first well-maintained, very, very, very long road. And this road was so well-maintained that people claimed that no mortal thing traveled as fast as Persian messengers, and that they could travel the entire length of the Persian Empire, the entire length of this 1,500-mile road in just a few days, which seems crazy to me, because I don't even want to think about driving 1,500 miles in a few days, you know? So my guess is that perhaps they had, when they sent out these messengers, they had teams, you know, maybe they had a pair of horses, and one guy would sleep on their horse, and the other guy would lead.
Yeah.
That's actually correct, because in my notes it says to deliver urgent messages, they would run a short distance, so basically to the next city, and they would give that message to someone with a fresh horse, and then they would ride.
Yeah, so just like the Pony Express.
Yep, just like the Pony Express, except 2,000 years beforehand. So
that's
go
really
Persia. Cool. The Persia Pony Express. PPH. So that's a pretty impressive achievement that they had. And I'm sure that such abilities to not only move messages, but to move goods with this road was just invaluable in the time. So Darius married the oldest daughter of Cyrus, which was Atossa, and he had a total of 5 wives, and his first son was Artabanzanes.
Artabanzanes.
And yes, and even though he was Darius's first son, Xerxes was the son that was chosen to be his heir, because it was the first son of Atossa, the queen, and the queen Atossa was the one that he loved most, and she had good authority and good rapport with the people in her kingdom. So Xerxes was the natural choice as heir.
I suppose that makes sense.
And yeah, 5 wives, and I think he had something like 12 kids or so. So Darius passed on those great genes, certainly. And I think it's impressive that he was able to marry Atossa and that she was the most beloved to him because she was a daughter of Cyrus, you know, and he had a part in, if the ruler before Darius was not actually an imposter, he had a part in removing basically one of her brothers, someone really close in bloodline to her, from power. And then she married into someone that was a little bit of a distant bloodline from her, you know?
Yeah, well, that's how you consolidate power when you're a great Shahanshah.
That's true. And how you consolidate greatness and bloodlines. Just, you know, passing on those good genes. He wants his kids to have beards at the age of 10 too, you know? Anyway, he also established a universal currency, which was called the Daric, which is, you know, pretty close to his name. But, I mean, you know, it's a pretty good name. At least he didn't have a horrible last name. I'm glad we're not running around exchanging Roosevelts, you know? That's too long. Or Eisenhower's.
Like Hashayar?
Yeah, that's long. I like Daric better. I think Yen is a really good name. Just Yen. Just real quick. But Daric is good. So I sort of applaud his decision. And the currency was so influential that it was actually recognized beyond the borders of the Persian Empire. And you know that when currency is recognized outside the borders of your own country, outside the borders of your own, I guess that country doesn't make sense, but empire, state, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That just sort of speaks volumes to how much power and how enduring your state is, you know?
Right, sure.
Yeah, Darius also followed Zoroastrianism. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, Zoroastrianism, I believe.
Zoroastrianism, yeah. But Darius was also a very kind ruler in that he rebuilt and refurbished lots of religious works and religious buildings for those of the different creeds in his empire. So when you have a far-reaching empire, you're obviously going to have people from different faiths and different traditions, and Darius was very indiscriminate when it came to rebuilding their places of worship and places of religious importance. And whether it was a way of reducing the uprising of his people, or whether it was due to his cultural fluency and his tolerance for culture and his love for culture, you know, I would like to think it was the latter. It was the reason why he was able to, and the reason why he desired to do these types of things. So that's another pretty impressive thing. So we all know that Cyrus did not enslave his people. And since Darius was so willing to not force his religion on other people the same way Cyrus was, that's another thing that Darius did to follow in Cyrus's footsteps and make him a great ruler as well.
Yeah, so I bet that in those biblical books we talked about earlier, that the Jews' opinion of Darius was fairly high also.
Yes. So he also, a work of construction that he did was he was able to link the Red Sea to the Nile by canal, which definitely improved trade in his region and the ability of his men to move around. And he built a palace complex in Susa, and that was later on destroyed, but it was rebuilt by Artaxerxes I. And now the bricks of this palace are actually contained in the Louvre, so that's pretty cool, I think.
Ah, that is cool. And this is in Persepolis.
The Louvre?
No, not the Louvre. the palace.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
And he also finished some of Cyrus's projects in Pasgagarte. So even though he may have, this is kind of similar to his commitment to rebuilding previous temples of other religions. He even rebuilt previous projects of previous rulers.
Oh, that's nice of him.
Yes, it is. So now we're going to go into the later years of Darius. He had lots of rebellions in Asia Minor by the Ionians, and those were occurring for about 7 years. And the way that Darius was able to defeat these Ionian revolts towards the end of his reign, he actually shrewdly negotiated, so he got them to sort of let their guard down, make them think that he was really committed to having peace occur, he was really willing to listen to their terms. And then what he also did was counterattack simultaneously. And some of his first counterattacks were pretty unsuccessful. And so there was actually a general ebb and flow in terms of the success that he had with this conflict. But after 7 years, the resistance finally died down. And after this Ionian revolt occurred, Darius attributed the cause of this Ionian revolt to the larger Greek population. And that's when he started looking at the Greeks as a people to conquer, both for their resources and to punish them for the Ionian revolt. And we also know that Darius is not famous for being the one to attack and try to conquer the Greeks. And Trevor, I think you know who is more famous for trying to attack and conquer the Greeks.
You're speaking of his son Xerxes.
I am speaking of his son Xerxes.
But Darius did try though.
Oh, Darius did try. He just wasn't able to finish because his health failed about 3 years into the conflict, and Xerxes was the heir, and Xerxes is the one that picked up the conflict from where he left off, and we'll probably talk about that next week, or as a very brief overview of Xerxes, and maybe we'll go into a brief overview of Xerxes and Artaxerxes, or something like that, and it'll be a shorter episode. But I think it's worth, going over those facts, since probably some of the people listening have seen things like 300 and whatever the sequel to that movie is, which I'm sure is equally bloody and visually appealing.
Yeah,
but I have not yet seen.
It tells the Battle of Salamis.
Okay.
So
yeah, maybe we'll talk about some of those battles and Xerxes and Artaxerxes as a whole, and perhaps the Greek powers that were involved in that conflict as well.
That'd be cool. But Darius, he did invade Greece.
Yes, but I don't think that Darius was the main. I don't think he was the main event. I think he was too early for it to all happen.
Well, only because he was defeated by the Athenians. at the Battle of Marathon.
And because of his bad health.
Oh, he was already falling ill at the time of the Battle of Marathon.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. So Xerxes, it's not like Xerxes just had this all thrust upon him. Xerxes was kind of expecting this role because Darius's health was failing during this conflict.
So this will be the short version of the Battle of Marathon. So,
Alright.
Battle of Marathon. The Persians landed in the Bay of Marathon, about 30 kilometers east of Athens, and at the Athenians and some of their various client tribes and city-states came to meet the Persians. The numbers at the beginning of the battle were about 10,000 for the Athenians and about 25,000 for the Persians. So the Athenians were very well outnumbered.
Yes.
They delayed for 5 whole days trying to stall for time because Sparta had sent an army to go and aid Athens in this war against Persia that was threatening them all. But the Spartans had not yet arrived when the battle began, and so we're not really sure why the battle began. It seems like neither of the commanders on either side seemed eager for battle. They were both trying to delay for more reinforcements. But for some reason, the battle did happen. Most of the contemporary historians say that it was the Greeks who attacked first. So the battle was joined, and here's the interesting bit. There's a bit of contention over whether this was actually intentional or not, but the Greek phalanx was asymmetrical. Or, well, I guess it was symmetrical, but it was unbalanced. The Greek commander, he ordered the tribes that were forming the central line to form a phalanx 4 men deep.
Mm-hmm.
And the tribes at his wings to form a phalanx 8 ranks deep.
Okay.
And you may think that this is like some kind of defensive strategic formation. He was worried about attack from the wings, but that doesn't make sense either because the battle was fought in a pass with forests on both sides, mountainy forest. He wasn't really expecting an attack for that direction. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm not a historian. This is not something that I should be saying, but I'm going to go ahead and say this was intentional. So, as is expected, then the Greek center line was pushed back, but the wings were not, which allowed the Greeks to then swing in, cut off a very large portion of the Persian force, and then surround them and kill them all to a man, just like at the much more famous Battle of Cannae that I hope we'll talk about someday.
Okay, yeah.
And this forced the rest of the Persians to return to their ships and sail away, and it saved the Greeks from a Persian invasion for
2 or 3 years?
2 or 3 years, right? Was it 2 or 3 years? Yeah.
Well, this thing
I thought it was 10 years.
Oh, it might have been 10. But this thing, my information is saying that after this first attack, so this first attack occurred in 490, and Darius died in 488. So just 2 years later.
Okay, yeah. So,
but depending on when Xerxes attacked.
If I recall, I believe Xerxes attacked in like 482-ish.
Yeah, I'll look it up. Set out in the spring of 480 from Sardis.
Ah, I was off. Alright. So it saved the Greeks for about 10 years.
Yep, that makes sense. And then after that, you'll find out what happens later.
Thanks for listening to our ramblings on Darius. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Xerxes and Thermopylae, followed by a 2-parter on Alexander, and then we'll be mostly through the really old parts of our backlog, and the style should even out. In the meantime, please leave us a rating or review on iTunes or Google Play. If you want to submit a correction or just say hi, you can reach us at thegreatstodate@gmail.com.
Adams said it. Adams proposed calling Washington His Highness, the President of the United States, and protector of the rights of the same. And he was like, please, no, let's not do that. Have you heard of that?
He was succeeded by his son, and I can't remember his son's name, but he was more of a footnote in history. He didn't last long.
Okay. And neither will we.
Darn tootin'.
Anyway. On that exceedingly depressing note.